I never thought I would find myself questioning the foundation of my marriage. For years, I believed our family was solid. We had been together long enough to build a rhythm, a life that seemed ordinary but safe. I loved my spouse, and our son was the heart of our world. On the surface, everything looked fine: family dinners, school runs, birthdays, and small celebrations that made our house feel alive. But slowly, things began to change. It started so quietly that I almost didn't notice. At first, I convinced myself it was just stress, maybe work pressure, or the routine dulling what once felt bright. But my heart whispered something I didn't want to hear: something wasn't right. My spouse had started staying up late, clutching their phone as if it held secrets I wasn't meant to see. Nights that used to be filled with laughter or casual conversations turned into silence. They scrolled endlessly, smiling faintly at messages I wasn't part of. When I asked who it was, the answers were vague: just work, just a friend, nothing important. But I felt the walls between us grow taller. Our intimacy faded, not just physically, but emotionally. They avoided my eyes when I spoke about the future, as though planning ahead was no longer something they cared to do with me. There were changes in habits too. More attention to appearance, sudden new clothes that didn't match their usual style, unexplained absences with weak excuses. They started leaving early and coming back late, brushing it off as longer hours, urgent meetings, or traffic delays. For years, I had trusted them completely, never even allowing suspicion to cloud my mind. But now, trust was being replaced by unease that lingered every time they stepped out the door. I told myself not to overthink, but it's impossible to silence the instinct that screams when something is wrong. Even our son noticed small things. Children always see more than adults think they do. One evening, he casually mentioned that someone was around while I was at work. When I asked who, he shrugged, as if it wasn't important. But the casual way he said it planted a seed in my mind that refused to stop growing. I began to replay moments I had dismissed before: whispered calls that ended as soon as I entered the room, doors closed when they used to be open, the smell of unfamiliar perfume on clothes, the way my spouse's expression shifted when they received certain messages. Each detail felt like a tiny piece of a puzzle forming a picture I didn't want to see. My nights became restless. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was losing my mind or if my marriage was already lost. I still hoped I was wrong. Part of me clung to the love we once had, to the belief that years of life together couldn't just crumble silently. I wanted to believe stress was to blame, that it was just a passing phase. But inside, a gnawing ache reminded me that love without honesty becomes hollow. And every hollow space between us was filling with doubt. The day everything shifted came without warning. It started like any other ordinary day, but by nightfall, the suspicions I had buried would no longer stay hidden. Because the truth I feared was waiting closer than I ever imagined. And I would come face to face with it in the last place I expected, inside my own son's room. That day seemed so ordinary at first that I had no reason to expect anything unusual. I went about my routine like always, moving through the house, tidying here and there, glancing at my son's room as I passed. It was late, and he had already gone to sleep in my room after asking if he could watch something with me. I didn't think much of it at the time, but that small request turned out to be the reason I walked into his room later that night. I only meant to grab a book he had left on his desk, nothing more. But when I opened the door, the air felt different. At first, I thought it was my imagination. But then I noticed the faint trace of perfume hanging in the air, something unfamiliar, too strong to belong to me. My eyes drifted to the bed. The sheets were wrinkled, not from a child's sleep, but from someone else's presence. I froze. My pulse hammered in my ears. The silence was heavy, almost mocking, as if daring me to look closer. And then I saw someone. It wasn't my son, of course. It wasn't anyone who belonged in that room. It was a stranger, though not entirely unfamiliar, someone I had seen before in passing, someone connected to my spouse's world. They were sitting there, waiting, as if the room had become a meeting place I was never supposed to enter. The shock hit me like a tidal wave. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My mind raced through every possibility, trying to make sense of it, but deep down, I knew the answer before a word was spoken. The person's expression told me everything. A mix of guilt and arrogance, as if they were caught but not sorry, as if they knew the secret had been uncovered too soon. The realization crashed over me. I had stumbled into the truth I had been trying so hard to deny. My spouse wasn't just distracted. They weren't just tired, stressed, or preoccupied. They were unfaithful, and the betrayal had happened under my own roof, in the most innocent place of all, my child's room. I felt fury rising inside me, colliding with heartbreak so sharp it nearly doubled me over. My hands trembled, but I forced myself to stay silent. My son was in the other room, and I couldn't let him see me lose control. The stranger mumbled something, an excuse, a plea. I couldn't even register the words. All I could hear was the sound of my trust shattering. They left quickly, slipping past me, avoiding my eyes, leaving behind nothing but the scent of betrayal and the image seared into my mind. I stood there in the stillness of the room, staring at the evidence of everything I had feared. My heart felt heavy, my chest tight, but my mind was racing with questions. How long had this been happening? Why here, in the space meant for my son's comfort and safety? How much had my child noticed? The thought of him seeing or understanding even a fraction of this truth was unbearable. I felt sick at the possibility that his innocence had been tainted by secrets that never should have entered his world. I closed the door quietly, almost mechanically, trying to process the storm inside me without letting it spill out. My face burned, my throat ached, but I held it together, because I knew the explosion had to wait. The time for confrontation would come, but in that moment, my focus was survival. I couldn't collapse. I couldn't scream. I couldn't let the weight of betrayal crush me, not yet. That night, lying awake next to my son, listening to his soft breathing, I felt my heart break in silence. I stared at the ceiling, the image of that stranger burned into my memory. I thought of every sign I had ignored, every excuse I had believed, every time I silenced my instincts. The truth was no longer hidden. It had been sitting there, waiting for me to walk in. And I had finally seen it with my own eyes. That night, I realized I wasn't just betrayed. I was humiliated inside my own home. When morning came, the silence in our house felt louder than any argument. I couldn't look at my spouse without seeing the memory of what I had walked into the night before. Every word I wanted to say burned inside me, but I waited, watching, listening, studying their face as they moved about as if nothing had happened. The calmness in their demeanor made my stomach turn. How could they act so normal when everything between us had collapsed? I realized quickly that pretending was no longer possible. I needed answers, even if they destroyed me. That evening, when our son was out of earshot, I finally confronted them. My voice shook as I told them exactly what I had seen, every detail I could no longer keep inside. At first, they denied it, their words sharp and defensive, accusing me of misunderstanding, of jumping to conclusions. But the look in their eyes betrayed them before their lips ever did. I pressed harder, unwilling to back down, and slowly, the mask crumbled. They confessed. The admission came in fragments, broken sentences filled with excuses that cut deeper than the silence before. It hadn't just been a one-time mistake. It had been ongoing. The person I had seen wasn't random, they were someone close enough to be trusted in our circle, someone who should never have crossed that line. The betrayal was not only physical, it was emotional, woven into the daily fabric of our lives. I asked them why. The question sounded hollow even as it left my lips, because no reason could justify the wound they had carved into my heart. They spoke of loneliness, of feeling unseen, of needing attention. They painted themselves as the victim of neglect, twisting the story into something that almost asked me to feel guilty for their choices. But no explanation could erase the image of a stranger in my son's room. No excuse could soften the blow of knowing I was not enough in their eyes. As they talked, I felt myself growing colder, harder. I had imagined that if this day ever came, I would explode in rage, but instead, I felt drained, emptied of everything except sorrow. I looked at the person I once trusted more than anyone, and all I saw was someone I no longer recognized. The vows we had exchanged, the years we had built together, suddenly felt like lies. The worst part wasn't even my own heartbreak. It was the thought of my son. He had already seen and heard too much. Children might not understand the full weight of betrayal, but they understand tension, silence, raised voices muffled behind doors. That night, he asked why we were arguing, his small voice trembling with confusion. I forced a smile, brushed his hair back, and told him it was nothing, but inside I was breaking all over again. I lay awake later, torn between choices I didn't want to face. Do I stay for the sake of stability, trying to rebuild trust that felt irreparably broken? Or do I walk away, knowing that leaving would shatter the only family my son had ever known? Every option felt like loss, every path painted with pain. But one thing became clear: I could no longer look at my spouse and see the person I once loved. The confrontation ended with no resolution, only tears, silence, and a chasm wider than before. I knew then that even if I chose to stay under the same roof, something essential had died. That night, I realized my marriage wasn't just broken. It was shattered beyond repair. The days that followed felt like walking through ashes. Every corner of the house carried reminders of what I had lost. The chair at the table where we once shared meals became a symbol of emptiness. The silence between us grew so heavy that even the sound of footsteps on the floor seemed unbearable. My spouse tried to speak sometimes, to explain, to apologize, to cling to the idea of repair, but the words fell flat. Once trust has been shattered, there is no magic phrase that can glue it back together. I listened, but my heart no longer responded. My mind was consumed by choices. Part of me wanted to pack up, take my son, and never look back. Another part of me hesitated, weighed down by fear of the unknown. What would life look like as a single parent? Could I provide him with everything he needed? Could I shield him from the pain of a fractured home? These questions swirled endlessly, but beneath them was a steady truth. Staying would mean sacrificing myself, living in constant shadow, pretending to forget something that had marked me forever. My son became my anchor. In his eyes, I still saw innocence, love untainted by betrayal. I realized I couldn't let his future be shaped by watching me accept less than I deserved. He needed to learn what strength looked like, what self-respect meant, and how to choose dignity over despair. Every time he hugged me, every time he asked me to read him a story, I found pieces of courage I didn't know I still had. The process of healing didn't begin with leaving. It began with deciding that I mattered. I started to take small steps, talking to someone I trusted, writing down my feelings, finding space to breathe without being suffocated by lies. The pain was still there, sharp and raw, but little by little, I began to see it as something I could carry without letting it destroy me. I stopped asking why me and started asking, what now? Eventually, the decision became clear. I chose to walk away. Not out of spite, not out of bitterness, but out of necessity. Love without trust is a hollow shell, and I refused to raise my child inside a home filled with silence, suspicion, and resentment. Leaving was terrifying, but it was also liberating. For the first time in months, I felt like I was choosing life instead of waiting for the pain to consume me. In the weeks that followed, I found a strange kind of peace. It wasn't easy, but it was real. My son adjusted slowly, and though he asked questions, he also adapted with the resilience children often have. I gave him stability in the ways I could: routine, comfort, presence. And I gave myself permission to grieve, to heal, and to rebuild. Looking back, betrayal changed me. It taught me to listen to my instincts, to honor my worth, and to never ignore the small signs that whisper truths before they roar into reality. It stripped me of illusions, but it also handed me strength I didn't know I possessed. I discovered that survival isn't just about enduring, it's about choosing to rise, even when the weight of heartbreak tries to hold you down. I walked into my son's room that night and found betrayal waiting for me. But in that same moment, I also found clarity. Betrayal ended one chapter of my life, but it didn't end me. It gave me the strength to rewrite my story, not as a victim, but as someone who refused to settle for a life built on lies. And though the scars remain, they remind me of how far I've come and how much further I can still go.